characteristics, and we were in the middle of a hypothesis test. And if you remember, we were at the point where I was going to introduce a new sample characteristic, or should I say samples characteristic, called P sub C. Now, I want you to remember, I'm going to rewrite this up here. P sub H, we had written down, was 248 out of 300. And P sub L was 202 out of 300. Okay. We'll need those to calculate P sub C. Now, here's what P sub C is. It is a combined estimate of the total population proportion. Okay, so what P sub C would represent is our best estimate of the true proportion of all American adults that would buy an electric car if gas rose to $6 a gallon. Okay, so and our best estimate for the, if you think about it, for the true proportion of all adults, right, both high income and low income, regardless of income, would be kind of a combination of these two proportions. You know, one of them might be too high, one of them might be too low. And so what P sub C is going to be is an estimate of the true proportion that would buy an electric car among all Americans. And this is how we do it. It's going to be N sub H, P sub H, plus N sub L, P sub L, divided by N sub H plus N sub L. Okay, now I've got a calculator here. I actually haven't calculated this yet, so we're going to do it together. Okay, so you all have one of these, right? Okay, so let's do that. So what I'm going to do is N sub H is 300, P sub H is 248 over 300, N sub L is 300, P sub L is 202 over 300, and then the denominator is just N sub L, or N sub H plus N sub L, so 300 plus 300 makes 600. So essentially you can see those 300s are going to cancel out in both of the fractions up there. What I really have to do is just add 248 and 202 and then divide that total by 600. So 248 plus 202 is at 450 divided by 600. Okay, which, wow, I think I can do that in my head, right? That's 3/4. So the P sub C is going to be 0.75. Okay, 450 divided by 600 makes 0.75. Okay, we're going to need that number P sub C to calculate our Z test statistic, which is where we were in the hypothesis test. Okay, now if you run this test on the calculator, the two proportion Z test, you won't have to like physically calculate P sub C or anything. The calculator will do all that for you. But let's, I'm going to erase this business, and we're going to go ahead and write the formula for the Z test statistic up here. So the Z test statistic here is this. Okay, it's the sample, the difference in the sample proportions. Okay, so that's going to be P sub H minus P sub L, and then divided by, and we need a big square root here, P sub C times 1 minus P sub C divided by N sub H plus P sub C times 1 minus P sub C over N sub L. Okay. Now, I wrote that test statistic out with subscripts that have context. If you want the general form of that, this would be a 1, and the H and the L will become just a 1 and a 2. P sub C is still P sub C, but then that'd be N sub 1 and N sub 2. Okay. So that's our Z test statistic. Now, this is the point where we would calculate our Z value, get our corresponding P value, etc. Now, I'm not going to plug in the numbers and do this by hand. I'm going to do this on a calculator. So on your yellow calculator, you can go to, I remember you go to stat test and then go down to two proportion Z test, on this one, it's choice number 6, I think it was. So what I'm going to do, so x sub 1 is 248, that's the number of successes in the first sample. N sub 1 is 300, x sub 2 is 202, N sub 2 is also 300. And this was a two-tailed test, so I'm going to choose does not equal. I'll go to calculate, okay, and I'll write down what I get here. I got z equals 4.34, I'll just round it to that. And p is 1.45 times 10 to the negative 5th. So 0 0.12345. Okay, which is very, very, very close to 0, right? I mean, if we wrote that that was essentially 0, that would be just fine. Notice, okay, so in the output value, notice it gave you each one of the sample proportions as a decimal. It also gave you the p sub c. Okay, it's the one that just has a p hat. Notice where it says 0.75 on your screen. Okay, reminder, if everybody else took these calculators before you had a chance to swipe one, TI is making this software available for free on any desktop or mobile device. If you go to TI, Texas Instruments website, it'll show you how to do that if you don't have one of these. Okay, so I've got my z value, I've got my p value. Now what I do is now, of course, it's time to draw my conclusion, or to write my conclusion statement. Okay, so since p is less than alpha, we reject h naught at the 0.05 level.